I wish I could bottle some of the caring and the love that's in this room right now and take it back and sprinkle it on people who've never known such caring and such love in their lives. As I've said, dying people crave somebody that they can talk to about what's happening to them. And often they can't talk to members of their family, particularly if the patient is a man. Men are used to being the head of the household. They're used to being the husband and the daddy. They're used to being in charge. And when a man is dying, it's very hard for him to give up that role. And often men will pretend that they don't know what's wrong with them if they think it's going to protect the people they love. I can't tell you how often I go into a living room and a woman will say, "Please, Dr. Gordon, don't let my husband know he's dying," because he couldn't take it. And 2 minutes later, the man in the bed will say to me, "Don't let my wife know I'm dying. She couldn't take it." I think it's our job to build bridges between these people because they need each other. But that doesn't mean that I go back in the living room and I say, "Listen, your husband knows he's dying, so face it." I never do that. If a wife tells me her husband doesn't know, and then the same husband tells me that his wife doesn't know, I realize that they're not talking to each other, and maybe they want it that way. But then I realize he must have somebody that he can talk to, and that's usually the hospice volunteer or the Salvation Army visitor. If you are the privileged one that these patients begin to talk to, you're being given a precious gift, confidence from the people who's dying, from the person who's dying. In all my years of caring for the dying, I have never once told a patient that he's not going to get better, not once. But in that same 40 years, I've never cared for a patient who did not ultimately tell me that he was dying. And then I was ready to help him. If the patient is dying and you want to be close to him and you want to be his friend, one of the kindest questions that you can ask is, "What does your doctor say about you?" That lets the patient know right away that you're not just there to pay a courtesy call. You're there because you really, truly care about what's happening to him. So, "What does your doctor say about you?" lets him know that you're serious, and then he has a choice. He can say, "I don't want to talk about it," or he can tell you what the doctor says. It's much easier for him to say, "I don't want to talk about it," if you ask that question than if you say, "What's wrong with you?" A lot of patients may feel obligated to tell you, or you may turn them off completely and they won't talk to you at all. So what does the doctor say about you is a good way to get started. And if the patient says, "Well, it looks bad and I don't think I'm going to make it," then you must train yourself to ask the hardest question of all. It's still very difficult for me to ask this question, but it's essential. When the patient says, "I'm not going to get well," I make myself say, "Well, how does that make you feel?" And it's very hard to say that, because you want to put your arms around him. You want to say, "Oh, I'm so sorry. Oh, I hope it's not true. I hope you get a miracle." Well, I believe in miracles because I've seen 1 or 2 miracles in my life. And every morning when I get up, I expect a miracle. I really do. There are miracles happening all the time. And sometimes we don't recognize them. But when I say, "How does that make you feel?" most patients come right back at me with, "Well, how do you think I feel? How would you feel?" And that's the cue to tell him how you would feel. This is the way you establish a relationship with a dying person. When he says, "How would you feel if you were in my shoes?" try to get in touch with how you would truly feel. And it's very difficult, really, when you're feeling well and you've just had a good breakfast and you've got good fellowship and you're in touch with God. It's so easy to say, "Oh, it'll be a piece of cake. Won't bother me at all when I die." But that's really not true. The answer for me, when people say, "How would you feel?" the answer for me is always, "I think I'll be a bit scared. I hope I won't be alone. I hope I won't be in pain. But I think I'll be a bit scared." And that is true for me. And during my long life, I faced death a few times. And it's still true for me. I trust that the Lord is going to take care of me because my Father loves me. But I'm still a bit scared. And patients accept that when I tell them, this is how I would feel. And they know that they can trust me because I'm not going to brush them off with cliches, and I'm not in a hurry to get out the door because I'm uncomfortable with the fact that he's dying. I'm not. And the third most important question that you can ask this patient is, how is your family taking what's happening to you? Because his answers will tell you a lot. He may say, well, my family don't know. They don't know what's happening with me. They think I've just got pneumonia. They don't know it's cancer. Well, if you have just talked to the family in the living room and you know that they know, this tells you that this patient is not communicating with his family. They are not talking about what's happening to him. So maybe you'll be the only person he can talk to. That happens over and over again. A man who can have dozens of visitors will have one person that he really talks to about what's happening to him. And after all, when you think about it, dying is one of the most important things that we will ever do. We don't have any choice about being born. And for the first few years, we don't have any choice about what we learn and how we learn it and who we learn it from. And then when we go away to school, we're influenced by other people. And it's only after a long time that our own personalities gel. Some of us never learn to know ourselves. But we really don't have any choice about most of the influences that come to bear on us. But dying is one of the most important things that we will do. Again, we have no choice about when we die. God is the one who calls us. And when it's time to go, there's no argument. We go. And yet, we're not allowed to talk about it. They let us talk about new babies. They let us talk about marriages. They let us talk about so many other things, but they don't let us talk about dying. So how is your family taking it? Again, lets the patient know that you really are interested in how he's feeling. You're interested in what he has to say to you. And believe me, you will be very privileged if you are chosen as the person that the patient picks to listen to the feelings in his heart. Let me remind you too, you already know this, but let me remind you again, that whatever a dying person tells you is for you alone. It is not for you to go and tell somebody else. It is not for you to go out to his family and say, let me tell you what he just said. If the patient wants his family to know these things, he'll tell them. What he tells you should be guarded as the gift it is. You hold it, it's precious, and you don't share it. Dying people, if you become their friend and close to them and they know they can talk to you and trust you, dying people sometimes tell you amazing things. I've heard some peculiar things in my lifetime. Most of them very happy, some of them very trivial, but some of them very serious. As one that happened to me last year, I had a patient who was a woman who had been widowed for about 10 years, and she had no children. She was rather poor and had no insurance left and no savings left, and really was at the end of her resources as well as at the end of her life. And I had gone to stay with her one night, and she said, I'm not going to live till morning, am I? And I said, no, I don't think so. And she said, then don't leave me, stay with me. And I said, I will, I won't leave, I'm right here. And she said, there's something I've got to tell you. And I said, what is it? And the story she told me was that back in 1930, she and her best friend and her best friend's husband went on a vacation to the Grand Canyon. And while they were at the Grand Canyon, my patient and the husband pushed his wife over the edge and killed her. And I said, you murdered her? And she said, yes, we did. And I reached out and said, oh, you poor soul. Oh, I know you must feel so bad. And she said, I don't feel bad, I'd do it again. And it was such a burden to me. And I said, you and this man murdered his wife and you're not sorry you would do it again? She said, yes, I'd do it again. We loved each other. And I said, well, what happened? And she said, oh, he was very nice to her in public for a whole year before we did it, so that nobody would suspect. And I said, you did it because you just wanted each other? And she said, yes, we loved each other. I said, wouldn't it have been easier to get a divorce? And she said, oh, she wouldn't have agreed to a divorce. She was Catholic. I said, so you murdered her and you're not sorry? She said, no, I'm not sorry. And I said, if I bring in my tape recorder, will you tell this to me again? And she said, no. I said, if I write it down, will you sign it? And she said, no. And I said, then why have you burdened me with this? You're not sorry and you won't confess it so that somebody else can know it. Why have you burdened me with this? And she said, because what we did should not fade from memory. And she did die within a few hours. And it was such a burden to me. And at first I comforted myself with the idea, oh, she's hallucinating. But I knew that she really wasn't. She was as clear-headed as she could be. And after her funeral, I sort of lived in a fog. I felt that there ought to be something I could do. So I had a friend in Montgomery who was on the district attorney's staff, and I went to him and I told him the story. And I said, now do something. And he said, let me get this straight. It happened in 1930 in another state. Both parties are dead. A verdict of death by accident was returned at the time. And by the way, he checked it through the computers, and it did happen. He said, neither of the parties had any children. There is no estate. Everybody concerned with this is dead. He said, I'm going to forget that you ever came in here. And so the burden was mine again. But I've found a way to share that. You got it. Every morning for the next few days when you look into the mirror to do your hair or to shave, I want you to think about this. And please tell at least one other person. Because I agree with my patient. I don't think what they did should fade from memory. They certainly, all three of them, need our prayers. And I think we should do that. And maybe in a way, we can atone for this unrepentant woman and her share in the taking of a human life. So think about that when you look in the mirror. Then there was the other patient who told me just before he died that he'd been married 3 times, and wasn't that wonderful? And I said, well, that's pretty good, but that's nothing really exceptional. He said, but I was married to all 3 at the same time. And he did. He had wives in little towns in Alabama, and he just visited around. And between 3 wives, he had 7 children. And I said, did they know about each other? And he said, oh, no, I've outlived 2 of them. He said, there's only 1 left alive. And I said, but these children have brothers and sisters they don't know about, don't they? And he said, yes, they do. They need to know about each other. I said, what are you going to do about it? He said, I'm going to authorize you to tell them after I'm dead. And I did, and it wasn't very nice, but fortunately they all seem to like each other, and the siblings know each other now, and they're together. But I'm never going to be amazed again at what I'm told, because the human heart and the human mind cannot be predicted. You never know what is in the heart of the person sitting next to you. Mostly it's goodness, and often it's very interesting, which is another reason to get to know your neighbor. Get to know more people, because there are wonderful things happening out there in this world, even among the dying people in our population. When I ask dying people, what is it that scares you the most about what's happening to you? Most patients tell me that they're not really afraid of the moment of dying. They say, I have faith in God, and I have faith in the hereafter. I think it's going to be all right. Some people say there's nothing out there. When I die, it just means I go to sleep and I never wake up, and that's the end of that, so I'm not concerned about it. Most people say they're not afraid of the moment of dying. But these same people say, but I am scared of what might lead up to it. I'm afraid I'll be in pain. I'm afraid I'll have so much pain I'll scare the children. I'm afraid I won't be able to stand it. I'm scared of pain. Well, we are able to reassure dying people today that there need not be pain while they're dying. Before I go on to tell you how this can come about, I'd like to talk to some of you about the anatomy of pain, what pain really is, and how professional health caregivers handle it. You nurses in the audience, please bear with me. The rest of you pay attention. If you go to a good doctor with a pain in your belly, that doctor is going to want to know everything that you can tell him about that pain. He wants to know, is it sharp? Is it dull? Does it come and go? Is it worse after you eat? Is it better if you lie down? He wants to know everything that he can find out about your pain. And when he's located the point of the pain and he's pushed on it 2 or 3 times, he'll smile at you sweetly and say, well, get dressed now and we'll talk. And while you're getting dressed, he makes a mad dash for his office and a thing called the Merck Manual, without which no doctor could continue. Based on his education and his experience, he will already have narrowed it down in his mind to 2 or 3 things that's probably causing your pain. He looks through the Merck Manual to make sure he's got the symptoms right, and then he'll narrow it down to 1 or 2. I don't know if doctors actually go eeny, meeny, miny, mo when they get it narrowed down to 2 diagnoses, but he has to pick one, and he does. He'll come back into the room and he'll say, well, I think your canoodling valve is loose, and I'm going to give you an antibiotic for that, and I'm going to give you something for pain. If your pain is not better in the morning, call me. A good doctor wants your pain to come back. No good doctor will ever give you enough pain medicine to take away your pain completely. Pain is the best diagnostic tool that any physician has. Without pain, he couldn't cure you of anything. If you take your medicine and your pain doesn't go away, you will call him the next morning, and he will have to decide that he should have picked meanie when he picked mo. And he will say, all right, I'm going to change your medicine. Go ahead, take the new medicine, but take your pain medicine. And if your pain comes back, come and see me again. Chances are this time he got it right, and your pain won't come back. This is why pain is valuable to the physician. If your pain comes back, he knows he guessed wrong and he's got to start over. But in the dying person, pain is of no value. We know what's causing the pain. We don't need the pain to come back to tell us what's happening. We know the pain is there, we know why it's there, so now we need to keep it away completely. And this is why pain control in the dying is different from pain control for the person who's going to get well. There is an excellent medicine which comes in and out of favor, just like child rearing. 1 year you're supposed to be tough with the little monster. The next year you're supposed to give the little darling everything he wants. This pain control medication is the same way. This year it's in favor. Last year it wasn't. But I have seen it used for over 50 years, and I know what this medicine will and won't do. Brompton's mixture was put together at the Brompton Chest Hospital in London about 55 years ago, and it's been in use throughout Europe all this time, so we know what it will and won't do. Brompton's mixture will not cure anything. Brompton's mixture has no effect on any disease. Brompton's does not shorten life. It does not lengthen life. What Brompton's does is keep away pain. None of my patients are in pain. I don't believe in curing pain after it gets here in the dying person. I want to keep it away in the first place. And Brompton's mixture, and I urge every one of you to remember the name, Brompton's mixture or Brompton's elixir, sometimes called Brompton's cocktail, is the medicine of choice among most physicians for the control of pain. Brompton's consists of morphine, which is a derivative of the poppy. Morphine has been the painkiller of choice for generations now, and it is a very good painkiller. But if you give a person with intractable pain enough morphine to take away the pain, that person's going to be badly nauseated. He's also going to have some bowel problems. One of the best known specifics in the medical pharmacopoeia for the control of nausea is cocaine. So a tiny amount of cocaine is added to the morphine. So we will have a patient who is free of pain, who has no nausea, and the cocaine also counteracts the morphine's tendency to cause bowel blockage. A tiny amount of cocaine is added to the morphine. To the morphine and the cocaine is added one of the tricyclic antidepressants for obvious reasons. And the whole thing is mixed up into liquid form. Only the patient's physician can prescribe this. The physician writes out the ingredients on his prescription pad, and he puts amounts by each of these medications, and the pharmacist mixes it up. Brompton's mixture is always given in liquid form. It is never given in tablets. It is never given in shots. Because we believe that by the time a patient is ready for Brompton's, he's had some unpleasant diagnostic procedures. He's had some painful treatments. He's had some days and nights of sleeplessness because of pain. And by the time he comes to us for help, we don't ever want to hurt him again by forcing him to swallow large capsules or by giving him shots for pain. Bear in mind that Brompton's mixture is used largely for patients who are dying at home. Patients who are in the hospital are given today what's called a morphine drip. That's just simply an intravenous feeding of fluids with morphine in it that drips constantly into the patient. But these patients are usually asleep most of the time. And patients who are dying at home tell me that if they only have a few days or weeks left to live, they don't want to spend it sleeping. They say, I don't want to hurt either, but I do want to see the sunshine and I do want to be with my family, so I don't want to be asleep all the time. And that's another side effect of the cocaine. The cocaine counteracts the tendency of the morphine to make a patient sleep a lot. So we'll have a patient who's free of pain, who sleeps 8 or 9 hours a night and is alert the rest of the time. Again, I think this is part of the quality of life. I found in my own experience that patients who are on this mixture don't pray for death the way other patients do. So often cancer victims say, why did God let me wake up this morning? Why didn't he just take me in the night? And again, patients will say to me, pray that God takes me tonight. I don't want to wake up in the morning. We don't hear that when the patients are on Brompton's mixture, because it takes away the pain, it keeps them alert, they feel pretty good. And another thing about this too is that when a patient is not hurting, when he's feeling fairly cheerful and he's not sleeping all the time, he doesn't feel like a vegetable, these patients often come closer to God, even though they're facing death. It's easier for patients to bear if they're not in pain. They begin to feel, well, I've had my life and it's time for me to go now, so it's all right. But patients who are dying in pain can only think of the pain. There's no room or time to get closer to their maker. So I think Brompton's mixture has so many wonderful qualities. As I say, it goes in and out of favor, but it's been coming back into favor now for 55 years, and it is an excellent medicine. It's mixed up into liquid form, and the patient is encouraged to take his own medication when he wants it. We know, our experiments show us, that a patient who is in the hospital in terrible pain, who has a nurse come in at 2 o'clock to give him a shot for pain, we know that she gives him the shot, and if she says, all right, that's got to hold you now for 4 hours, you can't have any more till 6 o'clock, we know that 2 hours after receiving a 4-hour shot for pain, most patients are in pain again. They're beginning to check the clock. They're beginning to think, I've got 2 more hours to go. Will the pain come back? And if it comes back, will it be real bad? Will I be able to stand it? What if she's late? What if she doesn't come in on time? Suppose it's not the same medicine. Suppose she doesn't give me the right dose. What if it doesn't work this time? 2 hours after receiving a 4-hour shot for pain, most patients are in pain again from the very anticipation of pain. Fear of pain causes pain. And if you can take away the fear of pain, you're going to take away a lot of actual pain. So we encourage patients to take their Brompton's mixture if they even think they're going to get a pain. And the result of this is, after keeping careful records, not just in this country, but in other countries where it's used, our records show us that patients who get their Brompton's mixture when they want it need less than half of the amount of painkiller as do other patients who are dependent on somebody else to give them the medicine. They need less than half, because the patient himself is in control of the pain. I'm an excellent nurse, I really am, but I have absolutely no right to tell anybody, oh, you're not hurting that much, oh, you can wait 30 more minutes, oh, I'll get to it as soon as I can. I have no right to say any of those things. So we ask that Brompton's mixture be kept where the patient can reach it. If it's in the living room, it sits on the table by his chair. If he's in bed, it sits on his night table. And it is true, patients voluntarily seem to cut down on the amount that they take once they're sure it's there and they can get it if they think they're going to hurt. So please remember the name Brompton's. Doctors often need to be reminded about Brompton's. And the reason for this is that the Brompton Chest Hospital in London, who put this together and tested it, took out no patent on the medicine. It does not have a name other than the name of the hospital where it was put together. And so it gets no advertising. No drug company owns Brompton's mixture. It gets no advertising at all. All other drug companies bombard physicians with samples and literature about try our new medicine when your patients have pain. And doctors tend to remember the catchy names that drug companies give. It's easy to remember Darvon, Dilaudid, Levodromeran, morphine sulfate. They can remember all those. And they're reminded daily in the mail, this is a medicine for pain. And doctors tend to write prescriptions for a familiar name. So I've never been refused a prescription for Brompton's, but I often have to remind physicians, don't you think this doctor needs Brompton's now? And the doctor will say, oh, sure, that's a good medicine, and write the prescription. But don't assume that your doctor will automatically prescribe it for somebody who's dying. But if you know somebody who's dying and is in pain, tell them to talk to the physician about Brompton's mixture. Brompton's keeps away pain. A final word about adults who are dying. Try to keep them as independent as possible. It's such a temptation to do things for people who are dying, and that's not always the right thing to do. People who are lying in bed waiting to die often feel useless and unwanted and a burden because people are waiting on them hand and foot. Try to see to it that even though the person's dying, he does as much for himself as he is able to do. Don't feed him if he can feed himself. Don't walk him to the bathroom if he can make it on his own. Keep him as independent as possible. And remember that even after they become bedridden, there are still things that dying people can do for us. Women can still put together a grocery list. They can tell you what to buy from the store. You can let her make the grocery list. Women often can sit up in bed and do a little needlework or knit. And when men and women can do nothing else, they can always give advice. If you can't find any other task for a dying person to do, ask his advice about something. I cared for a man who was dying in the hospital one time, and he was very lonely, and he told me that everybody who loved him had gone to the Lord. He said, I'm the last one. Everybody who ever cared about me is gone. Well, we learned to care about him too, but he was quite helpless, and I used to ask his advice about various things, and then I found out he was a plumber. And I invented a leak in my kitchen sink. I said, I've got this leak and the plumbers charge the earth. How can I fix the leak? So he told me how to fix the leak, and I'm pretty dumb about things like that. And I went back to him and I said, what you told me didn't work. And he said, then what I told you, you didn't do. Because if you had done what I told you, it would have worked. So he tried to draw me a little diagram. Your faucet looks like this inside, and if you take this off and then put that in. I tried that 4 more times, and each time I said, I'm sorry, I just couldn't make it work. I went in there, 2 or 3 days after that, and that dying man had 7 faucets on his bed. And he said, now one of these has got to be like your kitchen sink. And I picked out the one, and he had me take it apart and put it together the way we used to have to do in basic training with a rifle. I kept expecting him to say, now close your eyes and do it. But he did, and you know, he said, life's worth living. And I said, well, it sure is. You just saved me $50 if I had had to call a plumber. And do you know, other nurses and orderlies on that floor in the hospital came and asked him about real plumbing problems? And that man looked forward to each day. We propped him up in bed, and really, we had a pillow under his knees and propped him up behind so that he could lecture on plumbing. Really, and he did. He described how to unclog a toilet and what you should do and what you shouldn't do. And one nurse actually took all the innards out of the tank of her toilet and carried it into him. And he fixed it. So they can always give advice. I'll tell you something else that happens too, particularly if the person you're dealing with is over 60. If the dying person is over 60. These patients often begin to feel worthless. They feel as if they've not contributed anything during their lifetimes. And women especially will say, oh, I was just a housewife. And they really don't feel very good about themselves. And I don't like to see that, because every person has value. So if you're dealing with an older person, man or woman, try to talk to them about what they've done with their lives. And you can't say, tell me your biography, tell me something wonderful you've done. You can't do that. You have to help the patient. And one way to do this, as I do, if it's a woman, I'll say to her, tell me about your wedding day. And they say, what? I say, tell me about your wedding day. And most older women have not been asked this for years. And they're just delighted to tell you what they remember about their wedding day. And then you can say, well, what was the next best thing that happened to you? And they will tell you about other things. I had one woman who told me I was just a housewife. I don't know why God's let me live so long. I've just never done anything useful. I found out that she had had a handicapped child, a retarded child, and one who was also physically handicapped. She raised that child, and the child finally was able to take care of itself, and she was able to know that she could leave her child and it wouldn't just be forlorn and desperate, because she'd done such a good job of raising it. And when she saw that she could handle her own retarded, handicapped child, she became a foster mother for the state and raised other people's handicapped children. And I said to her, well, to raise a healthy, normal child is a tremendous task, especially if you do it successfully. But to take several handicapped, retarded children and do this, and you tell me you're just a housewife? And she didn't know it counted. We gave that woman a feeling of self-worth. And it helped her. You can do this with so many people. Ask them to tell you about something wonderful that happened in their lives. If you're visiting with a man, say, what was the first job you ever had? And a question like that may inform you when he gets through talking to her. He may tell you that he supported his family by delivering newspapers in the Depression. And yet here's a man who might think he never amounted to anything. You can help older people and sick people really feel the value that they are. After all, this country has been built by people who are older than we are. We wouldn't be the wonderful country that we are without the contribution of all these people. So you can do a little ego building while you're visiting the sick. Thank you. God bless you.